The year is 2009. The Steelers were coming down from their dramatic Super Bowl victory over Arizona, capped off by Santonio Holmes' toe-tap catch in the corner of the end zone that brought Lombardi number 6 to the city of Pittsburgh. With a defense led by Troy Polamalu and James Harrison, and Ben Roethlisberger firmly established as a clutch postseason QB, Pittsburgh was ready to defend in the AFC. But looming over the entire league was a return. After missing the entire 2008 season with a torn ACL, Tom Brady was back under center for the Patriots, just 2 years removed from an undefeated 50-touchdown MVP season. As long as Brady was healthy, they were the plus 450 Super Bowl favorites. And as always, the Colts remained in the thick of the AFC picture year after year with reigning MVP Peyton Manning. But in the NFC, his brother Eli was coming off a 12-4 season with the Giants, still built around a dominant defensive front and a punishing run game. The Eagles made waves with their signing of backup QB Michael Vick, just months out of prison, and the Cowboys, loaded with talent on both sides of the ball, even after sending Terrell Owens to Buffalo, were hoping to rediscover their 2007 form after an underwhelming 9-7 finish in 2008. But by far the most fascinating storyline in the NFC was in Minnesota. After months of speculation, retirement, and reversal, Brett Favre returned to the field, signing with the Minnesota Vikings in early August. At 40 years old, it was supposedly one final run after a rough year in New York. But this wasn't just any situation. Favre was joining a loaded roster that had a 24-year-old Adrian Peterson, an above-average defense, and Super Bowl aspirations. But of course, we can't forget Aaron Rodgers was entering his second season as a starter. With a new defense taking shape under Dom Capers, the Packers were in play to take a major leap. But things were also cooking in the Big Easy. The Saints had the highest scoring offense in football in 2008. Drew Brees was coming off his first 5,000-yard season, and Sean Payton's scheme could tear through defenses at any moment. But for all the production, endless doubt surrounded their bottom-tier defense that held them to an 8-8 record in 2008. Meanwhile, the defending NFC champions were intending to prove their run was no fluke. The Cardinals had come oh so close to a Cinderella Super Bowl title, led by the resurgent late-career Kurt Warner. With Larry Fitzgerald also coming off the greatest postseason of all time for a wide receiver, Arizona was a legit dark horse once again. The Jets handed the keys to outspoken head coach Rex Ryan, who brought a defense-first mentality and unapologetic confidence. Pairing those qualities with a rookie QB in Mark Sanchez, the Jets were putting everyone on notice. But a new era was underway in Denver as well. The Broncos moved on from franchise quarterback Jay Cutler, bringing in Kyle Orton as part of a controversial reset under first-year head coach Josh McDaniels. It was a bold shift in direction, and one that put the organization under the microscope. However, Tennessee entered 2009 with sky-high expectations after finishing 13-3 and earning the AFC's top seed in 2008. And an eventual legend entered the league when the Lions selected Matthew Stafford first overall, giving Calvin Johnson the quarterback he needed amidst a rebuild from rock bottom following their infamous 0-16 season. Week 1 of 2009 was a reminder that things weren't going to be as simple as they looked on paper. On Monday Night Football, Tom Brady made his long-awaited return for the Patriots as they hosted the Bills. And for 3.5 quarters, it didn't look quite right. But as the clock ticked down, Brady regained his MVP form, and 2 touchdown passes to Ben Watson in the final 2 minutes stole a 25-24 win and avoided what would have been a disastrous start. But just days earlier, the season had kicked off with a gritty battle between the Steelers and Titans. Pittsburgh won at 13-10, highlighted by a ridiculous one-handed Troy Polamalu interception. Though the moment was bittersweet, as Polamalu left the game with a knee injury that would linger throughout the season. But the Saints came out of the gates like a team possessed. In Week 1, they dropped 45 points on Detroit as Drew Brees tossed 6 touchdowns. Then in Week 2, 48 on Philadelphia. New Orleans was 4-0 after 2 more wins over the Bills and Jets. But they had company, because Brett Favre was turning back the clock. The Vikings were also undefeated, and Favre wasn't managing games. He was making throws downfield, extending plays, and elevating everyone around him. With Adrian Peterson, Sidney Rice, and a defense forcing turnovers in bunches, Minnesota erased any doubt they were contenders, especially after Favre ripped the 49ers' hearts out in Week 3 with his last-second 32-yard touchdown to Greg Lewis. Then, after a Monday night win in his first ever game against the Packers, the Vikings were 4-0. And the Colts were doing what they always seem to do. Peyton Manning threw for at least 300 yards in every game of the month and threw 4 touchdowns in Week 3 versus Arizona on his way to a 4-0 month. But the Jets were dominant in their own way. Under Rex Ryan, their defense became one of the top units in the league in short order, and Mark Sanchez did just enough for a 3-1 start that turned early skepticism into real belief, especially after beating the Patriots in Foxborough for the first time since 2000. But while new contenders were rising, no team fell harder than the Titans. Coming off their 13-3 season, Tennessee opened the year with 4 straight losses. The defense that had carried them the year before was now giving up 20 or 30-plus points on a weekly basis. But if there was one bright spot, it was second-year running back Chris Johnson, who piled up 284 yards from scrimmage and 3 touchdowns in a Week 2 loss to Houston. And a small but long overdue moment finally arrived for the Lions when they snapped their 19-game losing streak with a Week 3 win over Washington, putting an end to one of the darkest stretches in league history. On the other hand, the Giants looked like one of the better teams in football. In Week 2, the spotlight shined on Dallas, where the Cowboys opened their billion-dollar stadium in front of a record-setting crowd, but the celebration didn't last long, as the Giants spoiled the party with a 33-31 win. They were 4-0, and it's also worth noting their 24-0 steamrolling of Tampa Bay in Week 3. But the Broncos were the team exceeding their expectations the most, beginning 4-0 as well, thanks to a defense that held the Bengals, Browns, and Raiders each to 10 points or fewer. And in Week 1 against Cincinnati, they pulled off one of the most improbable finishes of the season, when Brandon Stokely caught a tip pass and raced 87 yards for a miracle touchdown in the final seconds. Already 4-0, New Orleans hosted New York in Week 6, dismantling the previously unbeaten Giants 48-27. They followed that with 46 points against Miami in a Week 7 comeback before beating Atlanta to end the first half of their season undefeated at 7-0. After the Packers-Vikings Week 4 matchup in Minnesota, Brett Favre traveled to Lambeau Field in Week 8 and hung 38 on Green Bay, 2-0 against his former team, and the Vikings were 6-1. But the Giants' offense went ice cold in October, so taking full advantage were the Eagles. Donovan McNabb had already returned from his September injury, and their 40-17 win over New York in Week 8 vaulted them into first place in the NFC East. But now in second place were the Cowboys, whose offense caught fire in a 3-0 month, and it was sparked by a breakout performance in Week 5, when Miles Austin erupted for 250 yards and 2 touchdowns against Kansas City, announcing himself as a true number 1 option and changing the identity of the Cowboys' offense. But no one looked as good as the 7-0 Colts, their month highlighted by a 42-6 win over the Rams. And after an iffy first couple weeks for the Patriots, everything clicked in October, and it culminated in one of the most lopsided games in NFL history. In a snow-covered Week 6 matchup, New England obliterated the Titans 59-0 as Brady threw 5 touchdown passes in a single quarter. The Patriots were fully back, and their only blemish in October came in an overtime loss to their old friend Josh McDaniels. Also this month, the Steelers looked like the champions they were, on a 4-game winning streak heading into their bye at 5-2 after handing Minnesota their first loss of the year. But also 5-2 were the Bengals. Back in Week 3, they stunned the Steelers with a last-second touchdown from Carson Palmer to Andre Caldwell, and they followed it up weeks later with another last-minute win again with a touchdown to Caldwell, this time beating Baltimore. They concluded their month with a 45-10 blowout of the Bears, showing they were for real. But the Broncos continued their shocking start, improving to 6-0 with wins over Dallas and New England that made them impossible to ignore, even if there were questions about their offense. But not every early success story held up. Despite acquiring star receiver Braylon Edwards from the Browns, the Jets came crashing back to reality with 3 straight losses as Mark Sanchez sunk them with turnovers, throwing 5 interceptions to the Bills. They would rebound in Week 8 with a 38-0 shutout of the Raiders, however, so New York was 4-4. November brought one of the most iconic games of the decade. In Week 10, the 8-0 Colts traveled to face the Patriots in a classic Manning-Brady showdown. The Patriots controlled much of the game, taking a 31-14 lead early in the fourth quarter after the second Randy Moss touchdown of the night. Even after Peyton answered with a touchdown to Pierre Garçon, it was still 34-21 with 4 minutes left. However, a 6-play drive capped by a Joseph Adai touchdown cut it to 34-28. And with just over 2 minutes remaining, New England made a decision that would live on for years. Facing 4th and 2 on their own 28, Bill Belichick elected to go for it, but the pass to Kevin Falk came up a yard shy. So a short field for Peyton turned into a Reggie Wayne touchdown 4 plays later, sealing a 35-34 victory to stay perfect. Week 11, the Colts escaped another scare against the Ravens thanks to a late interception by Gary Brackett. Then in Week 12, they fell into a 20-7 hole against Houston, only to claw all the way back for another comeback win. But at the same time, New Orleans pushed their record to 8, 9, 10-0 with a 38-7 blowout of the Bucs, and then 11-0, extending their winning streak against the Patriots just like the Colts. Drew Brees threw 5 touchdowns versus New England, and even though the Saints defense was still well below average, with the top-ranked offense, it didn't even matter. In the desert, the Cardinals were also having one of the best stretches in the NFC. From weeks 5 through 11, Arizona won 6 of 7 games, including a 41-point Week 9 showing against the Bears, where Kurt Warner threw 5 touchdowns. But while the league's elite teams were duking it out at the top, a glimpse of the future arrived when Matthew Stafford threw for 422 yards and 5 touchdowns, including a game-winning score after re-entering the game with an injured shoulder in Week 11 against Cleveland. And the Titans were turning themselves right around after their 0-6 start, because Chris Johnson became unstoppable, ripping off long runs week after week and putting together one of the most electrifying running back seasons in history. 228 yards against Jacksonville, then 135, 132, 151, and 154 against Arizona. 800 rushing yards and 7 touchdowns for Johnson during the Titans' 5-game winning streak that brought them back into relevance. But in the exact opposite fashion, the Broncos, who had started 6-0, took their first loss of the season, an ugly one, to Baltimore in Week 8. But that was just the first of many bad days. Losses to the Steelers and Redskins the next 2 weeks led to a Week 11 meeting with San Diego, who took control of the AFC West with a 32-3 throttling that included 4 field goals and over 200 yards on the ground for the now 8-3 Chargers. As the regular season entered its final stretch, 2 teams stood on the edge of history. The Colts were 14-0, the Saints were 13-0. But a Saints loss to the Cowboys in Week 15 snapped the streak. New Orleans actually dropped their final 3 games, entering the playoffs at 13-3, still the NFC's top seed, but obviously vulnerable after months of dominance. But with perfection in reach for Indy came a decision. In Week 16 against the Jets, the Colts led 15-10 late into the third quarter before pulling their starters. Manning exited, and New York stormed back to win 29-15, a choice that sparked immediate debate about whether it was the right move just walking away from history to maybe increase their chances of winning it all. They rested starters again in a Week 17 loss, finishing the season 14-2, though Manning would go on to win his 4th MVP. But while many focused on what didn't happen, the Chargers continued riding their momentum, finishing the season on an 11-game winning streak. Behind the MVP caliber play of Phillip Rivers, San Diego surged to a 13-3 record. The Patriots had another strong season, finishing 10-6, not as great as their peak years, but they were still the New England Patriots after all. The Bengals and Coach of the Year Marvin Lewis completed one of the most surprising seasons in the league, going from 4-11 in 2008 to 10-6 and an AFC North title behind Cedric Benson's career year and a top 6 defense. But the Ravens grabbed a wild card, so left on the outside were the defending champions. After losing Troy Polamalu for the year and a 5-game losing streak in November, the Steelers won their final 3 to finish 9-7, but it was too little, too late for a postseason berth. However, their Super Bowl 43 opponent Cardinals took care of business in a weak NFC West. Their 10-6 record was actually an improvement on their 2008. Brett Favre completed one of the best regular seasons of his career, throwing 33 touchdowns to 7 picks and breaking the NFL record for consecutive games played while leading Minnesota to a 12-4 record and the NFC North title. To make things even more unfair, the Vikings also had the Offensive Rookie of the Year and wide receiver Percy Harvin. And the NFC East came down to one game. The Cowboys and Eagles entered Week 17 with the division on the line, but Dallas delivered perhaps the clutch team performance of the year, shutting out Philly 24-0 to claim the division title. But the story didn't end there, because 1 week later they would meet again. Elsewhere, the Packers finished 11-5, earning a wild card as Aaron Rodgers logged his first 30-touchdown season. After an up-and-down first couple months, Green Bay won 7 of their final 8 games and also had Defensive Player of the Year Charles Woodson. The Jets snuck into the postseason at 9-7, powered by arguably the greatest cornerback season of all time. Darrelle Revis erased opposing number 1 receivers on a weekly basis, holding stars like Randy Moss, Andre Johnson, and Terrell Owens under 35 yards on what became known as Revis Island. And just outside the playoff picture, the Titans had a remarkable turnaround, going from 0-6 to finish 8-8, narrowly missing the postseason. But Chris Johnson made history with 2,006 rushing yards, an NFL record 2,509 scrimmage yards, and the Offensive Player of the Year award. Denver, though, lost 8 of their final 10 games to also finish 8-8 and miss the playoffs. But Brandon Marshall did break Terrell Owens' single-game record with 21 receptions in Week 13 against the Colts, a day where Kyle Orton targeted him 28 times. And another first occurred when D'Angelo Williams and Jonathan Stewart became the first teammates since the AFL-NFL merger to each rush for over 1,100 yards. To open the wildcard round, Cincy strung together a first-quarter touchdown drive, but New York hit back with a 39-yard Sean Green touchdown, 45-yard Dustin Keller score, and a key interception from Revis. Despite a 169-yard rushing performance from Cedric Benson, they failed to rally late in the fourth quarter, falling 24-14. Saturday night, after a 76-yard Jeremy Maclin touchdown for Philly, Dallas took over with big plays through the air and 2 forced turnovers on defense, good for a 27-7 halftime lead. The Eagles never even threatened in the second half, and a 73-yard Felix Jones touchdown put the game away in the third quarter. 34-14 Dallas. Sunday afternoon, Ray Rice kicked the party off in New England with an 83-yard touchdown on the first play of the game, before punching another score in 11 minutes later as the Ravens amassed a 24-0 first quarter lead. Julian Edelman scored twice, but Tom Brady's 3 interceptions were too much to overcome. And to cap off wildcard weekend, Arizona raced out to a 31-10 lead, highlighted by 2 forced turnovers and a 33-yard Larry Fitzgerald touchdown. But Aaron Rodgers answered with a historic playoff debut, trading blows with Kurt Warner in a back-and-forth shootout. Green Bay scored touchdowns on all 5 of their second-half drives to force overtime tied at 45 after Arizona missed a 34-yard field goal with seconds left in regulation. But in the end, one play proved decisive, as a Michael Adams strip sack of Rodgers turned into a Carlos Dansby scoop and score, ending one of the highest scoring and most chaotic games in NFL postseason history. Fresh off their emotional win, Tim Hightower put Arizona on the board on the first play of the game from scrimmage with a 70-yard touchdown run. But it was all New Orleans from there. 2 Breeze touchdowns and a big day from Reggie Bush, and the Saints rode a dominant first half to a 45-14 victory. Next, in the first ever playoff game at Lucas Oil Stadium, Peyton Manning found Austin Collie and Reggie Wayne each for very late second quarter touchdowns. And that was all they needed, as the Colts defense forced 3 second half turnovers to shut the door 20-3. Sunday in Minnesota, the Vikings defense was too much for Dallas from the start, recovering 2 fumbles on the Cowboys' first 4 drives. Meanwhile, Brett Favre was in vintage form, throwing 4 touchdowns, 3 of which went to Sidney Rice as they cruised to a 34-3 victory. And lastly, in a low-scoring affair, the Jets punted on their first 6 drives, but solid defense and 2 missed field goals for San Diego kept the game in check in the first half. The Jets picked off Phillip Rivers twice in the second half, and a 53-yard Sean Green touchdown propelled them to a 17-14 win and an AFC Championship berth. And in the AFC Championship, New York took a 17-6 lead, highlighted by an 80-yard Braylon Edwards touchdown. But Peyton Manning put on a masterclass from the second quarter on, scoring 24 unanswered points. After taking a 30-17 lead, the Colts defense closed the door with a late interception, completing a dominant comeback and securing a return to the Super Bowl 30-17. But Minnesota was in the driver's seat for much of the NFC Championship, behind 122 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns from Adrian Peterson, consistently moving the ball and vastly outgaining New Orleans. But 2 second-half interceptions and 2 second-half Peterson fumbles cost them massively, even trailing until Adrian Peterson's 3rd touchdown of the day with 5 minutes left tied it at 28. But with the ball back and in Saints territory with a chance to win it, Brett Favre threw a critical interception with seconds left that sent it to overtime. There, the Saints drove downfield and ended the battle with a game-winning field goal, 31-28. Super Bowl 44 brought together the league's 2 best teams in the Colts and Saints, a matchup remembered for one of the boldest coaching decisions in NFL history. Early on, it was Indy's game to lose. Peyton Manning orchestrated the offense with his usual command, a field goal, and then a 96-yard touchdown drive for a 10-0 lead as New Orleans punted twice. Even when the Saints moved the ball, they failed to finish drives, settling for 2 first-half field goals. At halftime, the Colts held a 10-6 advantage and appeared to be settling into the type of game they wanted. But everything changed to start the second half. Instead of kicking deep, Sean Payton called for a surprise onside kick, a play they referred to as ambush. The ball took a fortunate bounce off a Colts player, and New Orleans recovered, instantly shifting momentum. It was the first time an onside kick had ever been attempted before the 4th quarter in Super Bowl history. So with new life, Drew Brees went to work. He immediately led a 6-play touchdown drive to give the Saints their first lead of the night and put the pressure on Payton. The Colts promptly countered with a touchdown of their own to retake the lead, but the vibe had changed, so New Orleans spread the ball around on their way to another field goal. As the 4th quarter began, it was 17-16 Colts, but Indy's Matt Stover missed a 51-yarder with 11 minutes left, and what followed was a 9-play Saints drive in which Drew Brees went 7 for 7, punctuating it with a touchdown pass to Jeremy Shockey, then a successful 2-point conversion, pushing the Saints' lead to 7, but then came the finishing blow. With a chance to tie, Peyton drove into Saints territory, but as he looked to move the chains with Reggie Wayne on 3rd and 5, cornerback Tracy Porter jumped the pass and returned it 74 yards for a touchdown. In an instant, the game swung from a potential tie to a 2-score deficit. It was the only turnover of the night, and it ended the game. From there, New Orleans closed it out, clinching a 31-17 victory and the first Super Bowl title in franchise history. Brees finished with one of the most efficient championship performances of all time, completing 32 of 39 passes en route to Super Bowl MVP honors. But for the Saints, it was more than just a championship. It was a moment for the city of New Orleans, a payoff after years of struggle, resilience, and rebuilding after Hurricane Katrina.